Well, welcome back to the Steve Max Muscle Car Show podcast. We are now sponsored by High Octane Classics, the Northeast's largest muscle car and supercar dealership located at 143rd Washington Street in Auburn, Massachusetts, also known as 143 Washington Street in Auburn, Mass. High Octane Classics buys and sells and services muscle cars and exotics. You can call them at 508-859-4515. On this episode of the Steve Max Muscle Car Show, let's examine Chevy's first big block V8, the 348 and 409, the first use of Holley carburetors on Corvette small blocks, and the truth about 59 Impala tail fins. Do they really fly? There's that, plus a whole lot more on this episode of the Steve Max Muscle Car Show. Welcome back. This is episode 3 of the Steve Max Muscle Car Show. Okay, fact number 30, let's get started. Now, we all know that the Camaro second generation, 1970 onward, was never offered as a convertible, whereas the 67 through 69 was. Okay, fact 30. Drawn by the popularity of the aftermarket T-top conversions from outfits such as Hurst and ACC, Chevrolet offered RPO CC1 removable glass target tops in Camaros for the first time in late 1978. Priced between $625 and $695, 9,875 first-year installations were followed by 33,584 installations in 1979 and 24,816 installations in 1980, and in 1981, 30,455. Camaros equipped with the RPO CC1 Targa roof also received mandatory RPO N95 stowaway spare tires, which took up less trunk space. This left room for the T-tops on sunny days. So this fact here, of course, reflects the fact that Camaros were not available with convertible roofs, at least not from Chevrolet, in the second generation. So T-tops were kind of a next best thing. And check this out, Pontiac arrived into the world with T-tops earlier, 1976, 2 full years before Chevrolet embraced T-top options for 1978 Camaros. Okay, fact 31. This one is about Chevelle instrument panels. Form and function often fight for the same space. When the 1966 Chevelle instrument panel and dashboard were being designed in 1964, stylists opt to replace the 3 round pod layout available in 64 and 65 production models with a rectangular theme. Unfortunately, the speedometer took up most of the space, leaving small rectangular openings to handle the rest of the basic gauges. Any factory optional tachometer had to be strictly of the add-on variety. For the muscular SS396, Chevrolet devised a standalone tachometer mounted to the right of and below the steering column. Though its chrome housing, large 180-degree dial, and quality internals delivered a worthwhile product, its location was perfectly suited for making painful contact with the driver's right kneecap. Thus, it became known on the street as the knee knocker tachometer. Available as RPO U16 for an extra $47.05, records show that only 8,026 Chevelle customers chose it in 1966. And factory tachometers, well, they kind of fall into 2 categories: the crappy ones with really cheap internals and the good ones. Now, for the most part, good tachometers are strictly from the aftermarket. Companies like Sun and Autometer will sell you a tachometer that's very accurate. By contrast, most factory tachometers, well, they're built to a price, and quite often the needle movement is twitchy, and if you rely on that to power shift your 396 at 7,000 RPM or 6,800 RPM, you can easily misread the tack and wind up with a blown engine. And in the case of 66, with the knee knocker tack, wind up with a badly crunched kneecap. Moving on. Fact number 32. More about the knee knocker tachometer. Okay, the Chevelle knee knocker tachometer debacle of 1966 forced a rethink of tachometer placement for 1967. Still constrained by the limitations of the Chevelle instrument layout, designers moved the optional U16 tachometer to the left-hand side of the steering column where it's easier to read. Unfortunately, the new location obscured the dash-mounted left-hand turn signal indicator lamp. As a fix, Chevrolet added a small green triangular lens to the tack face and wired it with a small bulb to blink in sequence with the flasher when making a left-hand turn. Right-hand turns triggered the standard in-dash indicator lamp. Of the 62,785 SS396 Chevelles built in 1967, only 3,653 were sold with the blinker tach, as it has come to be known. 1968 finally saw a redesigned instrument cluster with attention paid to making the optional tachometer an integrated instrument positioned directly ahead of the driver in the instrument panel rather than as an afterthought. Buyers responded in a big way, and sales of the tachometer, now sold as the U15 Special Instrumentation Package, soared to 19,393 takers. Again, for 1968, the Chevelle was redesigned inside and out. Of course, the external Coke bottle shape was shorter in wheelbase and actually a little more modern than the 66, 67. And inside, again, the designers came up with a spot in the instrument cluster that was meant to take the tachometer, finally solving the problem of the optional tachometer placement. Okay, enough of the Chevelles. Let's move into the 1980s with Fact 33. During the performance revival of the 1980s, Chevrolet opened plenty of eyes with the popular NASCAR-inspired 1983 through 1988 Monte Carlo SS, selling nearly 100,000 units. Available as RPO Z65 and similar to earlier NASCAR homologation specials like the Dodge Charger Daytona, Plymouth Superbird, Ford Torino Talladega, etc., its primary mission was to legalize its low-drag nosepiece and lift-snuffing trunk lid spoiler for use on NASCAR superspeedways. The initial coupe-only body style was successful, but drag remained a concern on superspeedways where Bill Elliott's Ford Thunderbird was just out of reach. That's why Chevrolet introduced the B5T Aerocoupe option midway through 1986. The nose remained the same, but the backlight extended glass reduced drag by 2.7% and forced the use of a much shorter trunk lid. Often ignored is the fact the Aerocoupe uses a different trunk spoiler than the regular SS. It's sloped at a more extreme angle, so it doesn't protrude into the air as much. Now that fact is kind of neat. Now we got to remember, of course, the Monte Carlo SS package was first available in 1970, 71, 72, the SS 454. Which came standard with the big block. But for the 1980s, that was a much different, smaller Monte Carlo based on the G-body platform, which arrived in 1978 and was about 700 pounds lighter than the larger Monte Carlo first-generation vehicle. And those Monte Carlo SSs, I used to work at Ragsdale Chevrolet in Spencer, Massachusetts, and had the pleasure of test driving some Monte Carlo SSs back in the day. Those cars came with a 373 rear axle ratio when finally equipped with the overdrive automatic, I believe the 700 R4. So acceleration off the line was pretty good. They actually had a lot of pep. Not really a muscle car, but Chevrolet was certainly trying, and the Monte Carlo SSs are now starting to be seen as collector cars, and folks are restoring them. I get it. They're good cars. Okay, fact 34. Having been a non-participant in the Ford Chrysler factory-era wars of 1967 through 71, it's easy to assume the 1983 Monte Carlo SS was Chevrolet's first aero-enhanced NASCAR homologation special. But let's not forget the slope-nosed plastic fascia used on the 1975 and 76 Laguna S3. Though choked by a catalytic converter, the S3 is a true homologation special, worthy of respect for its role in keeping guys like Cale Yarborough, Darrell Waltrip, and Benny Parsons in the NASCAR winner's circle. And like most homologation specials, the somewhat ungainly lines were not a showroom hit. Only 864 S3 buyers stepped up to support the cause in 1976, the S3's final year of production. Now, the mid-70s were not a great time for high performance. We know that the unleaded fuel mandate arrived in 1973, I believe it was, and compression ratios had to fall to under 9-to-1 on pretty much all Chevrolet engines. When the S3 came out, its little plastic nose with the really ungainly angled grille, a lot of folks wondered, what the heck is that? But again, the slope nose was far more aerodynamic than the blunt, flat-faced grille seen on standard Chevys and Lagunas. So again, it was kind of a rethink, a redo of the Charger Daytona and Plymouth Superbird Chevrolet style. Okay, fact 35. More aerodynamics, Chevrolet. When horizontal tail fins first appeared on full-size 1959 Chevys, many imaginations were spurred into assuming they were actually wings. In those UFO happy days, urban legends and armchair engineers surmised the generous surface area caused lift at high speed and made the cars fly. To debunk the myth, Motor Trend Classic magazine recently stuck a '59 Impala into the GM wind tunnel and found the aerodynamics to be perfectly acceptable for general road use. About the only way to get any significant lift, they concluded, was to drive the car in reverse at excess of 100 miles per hour. Otherwise, the fins were harmless. I remember that when this magazine article came out. In fact, I was working the Barrett-Jackson auction block with Motor Trend Classic editor Matt Stone at the time. And Matt did say that the car in the GM wind tunnel was fine at 100 miles per hour. That is the wind speed. But when they spun it around backwards, it started to get some lift as the air got underneath those wings on the quarter panels and did cause some lift. But the reality is nobody drove a '59 Chevy backwards down the road. Nobody. Okay, more Chevy Monte Carlo facts in fact number 36. The 1970 Monte Carlo was the first post-war Chevrolet product to display its model year as part of an external metal emblem. Chief stylist Dave Halls and his staff designed the grille medallion to include the 1970 model year in Roman numerals. 1971 Monte Carlos also featured this detail with appropriate digits. Though the Monte's rolling model year designation was terminated in 1972, the practice was revived in 1978 to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Corvette. All 1978 Corvettes bear emblems that read 1953 Anniversary 1978 on the nose and horn button. Now this fact points out a little detail. Car dealers and car salesmen only want to sell you a new car when that car is truly new. And as a result, most car manufacturers don't want to put the year of the car on it because if that car doesn't sell and the end of the year rolls around, well, you're looking at last year's cars. In fact, in 1956, Buick did something really weird. They actually had the model year 1956 on the hood and grille ornaments. And again, if those cars languished on a dealer's parking lot for into 1957, suddenly it was last year's car, and that emblem told you that fact out loud. So it was kind of brave for Chevrolet to put the medallion in Roman numerals on the grilles of 70 and 71 Monte Carlos. Okay, we're 18 minutes into this episode. Let's take a quick break. Okay, we're back from our break, and let's get things launched with Fact 37. Fact number 37 is about Z28 hoods and what they're made of. The sexy twin NACA duct hood used on 82 and 83 Z28s was made of fiberglass. Chevrolet switched to a virtually identical steel stamping in 1983. The weight difference was negligible because production-grade fiberglass is much thicker and heavier than the paper-thin aftermarket goodies commonly sold to enthusiasts and drag racers. The extra heft of factory parts is needed to prevent warping in the hot sun, as well as to maintain federally mandated crashworthiness. The extra heft of factory-installed fiberglass hoods was needed to prevent warping in the hot sun, as well as to maintain federally mandated crashworthiness standards. The extra heft of the factory fiberglass hoods was needed to prevent warping in the hot sun, as well as to maintain federally mandated crashworthiness standards. More Gen 3 Z28 facts are found here in Fact 38. What do you call a 1982 Z28 Camaro without its distinctive trunk spoiler? A Z28-E, that's what. While stateside buyers of the all-new 82 Z28 rightfully drooled over its sexy three-piece trunk spoiler, export models were shipped without it, thus the Z28-E for export. On the upside, the E's exhaust system was built without a catalytic converter for a few extra ponies. Okay, let's move from Camaros to Corvettes with Fact 39. The encroachment of federally mandated crash protection standards forced Corvette designers to make plenty of styling compromises, and the results weren't always graceful. 1974 saw the replacement of the twin blade-like rear bumpers and subtle ducktail spoiler used since 1968 with an awkward plastic cap. This cap was used with minimal changes until 1980, when an integrated spoiler was added. The major detail that separates 1974 caps from the rest is its two-piece construction. There's an obvious vertical seam running down the middle. Subsequent caps from 1975 up were molded in one piece. Moving from the outside of the Corvette to the underneath of the Corvette, we go to Fact 40. A svelte floor pan made 1967 a year of inequality for 427 buyers. While the new M40 3-speed Turbo 400 automatic transmission was available in big block Camaros, Chevelles, and full-size cars, non-stick Corvettes, regardless of engine size, were stuck with the yawn-inspiring 2-speed M35 Powerglide. It's all because the Stingray's transmission tunnel was simply too narrow to suit the new Turbo 400. When the restyled 1968 Corvette appeared, it wasn't called a Stingray until '69, Duntop's minions made sure the Turbo 400 fit, ending once and for all the embarrassing reality of Powerglide-backed 427 Stingrays. Not surprisingly, the excellent Turbo 400 fostered a major uptake in demand for automatic Corvettes, from a yearly average of about 10% in 60 through 66 to nearly 50% by 1972. Okay, let's go under the hood and examine some engine and driveline facts. All 1969 Chevrolet passenger car big block engines were painted orange at the factory with one exception. The all-aluminum ZL1 427s installed in Camaros, 69 units, and Corvettes, only 2 units. These were delivered unpainted to show off their exotic alloy construction. The stamped steel timing cover and oil pan were painted black, not orange, on these ZL1 cars in 1969. It is kind of ironic. Other aluminum engines from General Motors, like the Buick Olds Pontiac 215 and the Corvair, were rendered in bare aluminum, whereas the aluminum Slant 6 from Chrysler in 1961 and 2 was painted red. But by contrast, in '69, the all-aluminum construction of the heads and the block of the ZL1 427 was proudly displayed in bare aluminum. Good work, General Motors. And again, those front covers and oil pans were the only things painted, and they were done in black. As for the valve covers up top, those were chrome-plated on ZL1s in 1961. Moving back to Chevrolet's first big block, we go to fact number 42. The W Series 348 and 409 stands as the only post-World War II Chevrolet V8 engine family that was not available with a single 2-barrel carburetor in base-level trim. Entry-level induction consisted of a single Rochester 4-barrel, even in heavy truck applications. The only W Series 2-barrel intake manifolds cast were pre-production test items, never released to the public. So it's true that, 327s, 283s, even the 396 were all available with 2-barrel carburetors from Chevrolet in their base trim, but not the 348, 409. All of them came with a standard 4-barrel carburetor, or triple 2-barrels, or a single 4-barrel, or dual 4-barrels in some cases with the 409. Moving on, let's go to more carburetor facts in fact 43. The first small block to receive a Holley 4-barrel carburetor from the factory was the '64 Corvette's optional L76 327. With 11-to-1 compression, a 485/485-inch lift solid cam, big valve heads, and a single 4150 series vacuum secondary Holley, it made 365 horsepower at 6,200 RPM. The '63 version of the L76 was fitted with a Carter AFB aluminum 4-barrel and rated 340 horsepower at 6,000 RPM. And again, the Holley 4-barrel, as we know it today, first appeared in 1957 on certain Ford engines. Chevrolet used the Holley 4-barrel in the 60s on their 396s, but its first appearance on a small block was that '64 L76 327. Moving over to some big block history, let's go to fact number 44. The reign of the TurboFire 409 came to an end on February 15, 1965, when it was replaced by the new Turbojet 396 in full-size passenger cars. Though 13 cubic inches smaller, the 396 enjoyed superior airflow characteristics and rated 425 horsepower in L78 trim, a 25 horsepower bump over the outgoing 400 horse L31 409. Now, a lot of folks forget that the 409 and the 396 were both available in 1965 in full-size Chevrolets. I've seen Impala Supersports with 409s and 396s that were both 1965 models. So it's an unusual thing to have one engine regime replaced by another one halfway through the model year. But I'm guessing Chevrolet probably had some unsold engines that they utilized and built them out in those full-size 65 cars. Okay, moving on. Fact 45, a little more 409, 348 trivia. When viewed upside down, the 348 and 409 valve cover assembly resembles the letter W. But that's not where the W Series 348 and 409 engine got its name. Following this logic, the engine should be known as the M Series, right? Because you don't see those valve covers upside down. You see them right side up. The W designation actually stems from the development codes assigned to a trio of experimental engine types, the W, the X, and the Y that Chevrolet was working on at that time. The best engine joined the small block for use in larger vehicles. I don't have specific details on why the W engine beat out the X and the Y, but that's where it got its name. And that motorcycle going behind us sounds like a twin, a V-twin, a Harley-Davidson. Which brings us to the point, we're actually doing these first few episodes in a, not a very quiet studio, but we'll address that as we go forward. Fact number 46, more 409 and 348 stuff. Here we go. 348 and 409 racers quickly learned not to rev the innovative big block like its small block cousins. Doing so invited connecting rod failure, with 4.125 by 3.250 348 and 4.313 by 3.5 409 bore and stroke dimensions. Both are happily over square and modern. The W's quirk was its combustion chambers were not formed in the cylinder heads, but rather placed within the cylinder bores by specifically contoured piston crowns and a deck cut at a 74-degree angle. The resulting pistons were much heavier than average, especially when forged, placing excess load on the connecting rods when pushed beyond 6,000 RPM, which you need when you're drag racing. Though lightweight billet rods had solved the problem, today, their scarcity and expense in the pre-1965 era doomed many a 409 to catastrophic failure on the racetrack. And it's funny, for about 10-15 years, I worked as a tech editor for Hot Rod Magazine and wrote a lot of stories about the Chevy 348 and 409, particularly about taking a 454 crankshaft and turning a 396 into a 348 into a 430 cubic inch 409 stomper. But one thing we always did was put aftermarket connecting rods in these engines. The reason being, to get any kind of compression or longevity out of a 348 or 409, you've got to run forged pistons. And with those pistons, you have to have quite a bit of a dome built into them. So the connecting rod, or at least the stock factory rod, looks about as thick as my thumb. So if you replace that with an aftermarket Crowler or billet piece, you're good. But again, before 1965, there really weren't any aftermarket rods available for the 348 or 409. So a lot of those guys blew their engines up trying to take out the 413 Mopars and 406 and 427 Fords. So that was the weak heel of the early W motor, the connecting rod. Okay, fact 47. Let's move on from the Chevy 409 to something very different, Camaros. Approximately 1 in 6 1970 Camaro buyers paid $44.25 for the optional G80 positive traction differential, the majority of which were fitted to performance-oriented SS and Z28 models. To warn against mishaps while changing a flat tire, Chevrolet affixed a positive traction sticker to the inside of the deck lid. On U.S. models, the sticker was white with red letters. Canadian cars bore a yellow sticker with black letters. So now we know. If you wanted to have limited slip in your Z28 or your SS396, you paid extra, $44.25. Kind of a weird thing. You'd think that, a guy who bought a Z28 wouldn't have to think too hard and check off the posi auction sheet, but you had to pay for it. And again, if you were buying one of these things in Canada, if you open the trunk, you'd see a different sticker, yellow with black letters, whereas here in the States, one of my tricks in the junkyard when I'm looking for posi, I pop the trunk lid open. If I see that white sticker with the red letters, I say positive traction in this car. And in fact, that sticker reads, while changing a tire on your positive traction equipped Camaro or Chevelle, be sure not to have the engine start and run because the other tire on the ground could potentially propel the car forward, leaving the jack and causing a problem. But there you go. You Canadian listeners, look for that yellow and black sticker. Americans, white and red. If you see that, you got posi. Okay, let's move on to fact number 48 and move from Camaros to Corvettes. 1981 Corvette shoppers were the first since 1954 not to have the choice of an optional engine upgrade over the base offering. All 1981 Corvettes were built with the 190 horsepower L81 350. Restricting engine availability simplified the task of emission certification, no doubt giving Chevrolet development engineers more time to fine-tune the upcoming Crossfire and Tuneport electronic fuel injection 350 engines that were just around the corner. One of the main things was the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, which was founded, I think, in 1970, and by 1980, 79, 80, was feeling its strength with something called the CAFE standard, which basically meant Corporate Average Fuel Economy, CAFE. And each car maker had to average out all of their mileage ratings, and that number had to be 19 mpg. If not, heavy fines followed. So as a result, again, Chevrolet, from the top to the bottom, including the Corvette, limited engines to simplify the process of just getting through the hassle of satisfying the EPA's CAFE standard. So 1980, man, 190 horsepower is as good as it got in your Corvette. But things got a lot better just a few years down the road. Fact number 49. The ultimate GM muscle car era 4-speed was the 1967 through 1974 Muncie M22 Rock Crusher. Unlike cast iron Chrysler A833 and Ford toploader 4-speeds, the M22 and M20 and M21 featured lighter aluminum case architecture. Used behind legends such as the L88, ZL1, and LS6, where ultimate strength was the goal, the Rock Crusher name derives from its gear's 20-degree helix angle versus the 45-degree angle used in Muncie M20 and M21 models. The straighter gear angles reduce gear train end loading for longer life in road racing applications. The gears also emit wonderful howling sounds. Because input shaft spline counts and case casting numbers are shared with certain M20 and M21 transmissions, the only sure way to identify an M22 is to dig in and inspect for low-angle gears. So yeah, a lot of guys talk about, yeah, my Camaro's got a Rock Crusher M20. Well, no, it doesn't. It's a Rock Crusher M22. And again, M22 was the General Motors regular production order code, RPO code, for the heavy-duty M22 Muncie transmission. And again, from the outside, it shares its aluminum case and tail shaft with the wide ratio and standard gear M20, and of course, close ratio M21. But again, the only way to really know if you have an M22 is to dig in and look for those low angle gears. And it's kind of hard to describe that over the radio or over podcast. But if you go online and just Google M20, M22 gear comparison, you'll find lots of pictures that show you what to look for. So beware and dig in. If you find one of these things at the swap meet, you gotta look. Well, that's it for this episode of the Steve Maggs Muscle Car Show. For my executive producer, Chris Roberts, I'm Steve Maggs. Hasta mañana. The Steve Maggs Muscle Car Show podcast is brought to you by High Octane Classics, the Northeast's largest muscle car and supercar dealership, located at 143 Washington Street in Auburn, Massachusetts. High Octane Classics buys and sells and services muscle cars and exotics. Call them at 508-859-4515.